Hello everyone, welcome to today's lesson. The name of the lesson is The Making of Global World. This lesson is taken from a social science history book, lesson number 3, and this is meant for all competitive examinations as well as the students of class 10th of RBSE and CBSE. So let us proceed. I welcome you on my channel Knowledge One Diary, and I am your host R.K. Sharma. So we are going to discuss some of the important questions and their answers. So let us start. Here is your question. Explain what we mean when we say the word shrank in 1500, 1500s. In the 16th century, due to the economic and cultural exchange, many countries had begun to come nearer to each other. Due to the trade and cultural exchanges, intimacy increased among themselves. In the 16th century, the European ships had discovered the sea route of Asia and they had reached America. America came into contact with many countries in the 16th century, and economic and cultural exchanges started among these countries. Thus we can say that the world had begun to shrink in the 16th century and different countries of the world came closer to one another. Imagine that you are an agricultural worker who has arrived in America from Ireland. Write a paragraph on how you chose to come and how you are earning your living. By 1890s, a global agricultural economy had taken shape, accompanied by complex changes in labor movement pattern. I was an agricultural worker and arrived in America from Ireland. Due to the import of cheaper food items, thousands of peasants were unemployed in Ireland. On account of unemployment, I had to migrate to America. Nearly 50 million people emigrated from Europe to America and Australia in the 19th century. Now food was not grown by peasants living his land, but by an agricultural worker. Hence I had begun to work, to live with my family near my employer's farm. He is satisfied with my work and I have been earning a good income working on the agricultural farm. Prepare a flow chart to show how Britain's desire to import food led to increased migration to America and Australia. And here is your flow chart. The following points show the reasons of increased number of people migrating to America and Australia when Britain decides to import food items. The first is Britain decides to food items. Cost of imported food to be less than the cost of food produced in India. Discontinuation of large tracts of land in Britain. Thousands of people being unemployed. People's income increases due to industrial progress in Britain. More food imports, need for development of farming and other infrastructure in Eastern Europe, Russia, USA and Australia. Labor shortage in America and Australia. People migrating to America and Australia in search of better future. Discuss the importance of language and popular traditions in the creation of national identity. Language and other popular traditions play important role in the creation of national identity. People attach great importance to their languages and popular traditions. These bring the people close to each other. They feel joys and sorrows of each other and help them in adverse circumstances. They begin to think that they are inseparable part of the country and they should live and die for the same of their country. Briefly summarize the two lessons learned by economists and politicians from the interwar economic experience. Asia continent. Chinese silk and poultry textiles and spices from India and Southeast Asia through silk routes were taken to different countries of the world. In return, precious metals, gold and silver flowed from Europe to Asia. America continent. Many common foods such as potatoes, soya, groundnuts, maize, tomatoes, chilies, sweet potatoes, and so on were not known to our ancestors until about 5 centuries ago. These foods were only introduced in Europe and Asia after Christopher Columbus accidentally discovered America. Give two examples of different types of global exchanges which took place before the 17th century, choosing one example from Asia and one from America. Economists and politicians drew two key lessons from interwar economic experience. First, an industrial society based on mass production cannot be sustained without mass consumption. But to ensure mass consumption, there was a need for high and stable income. Income could not be stable if employment was unstable. Thus, stable incomes also required steadily full employment. But make alone cloud could not guarantee bill employment. Therefore, the government would have to step in to minimize fluctuation of price, output and employment. Economic stability could be earned only through intervention of the government. The second lesson related to a country's economic links with the outside world. The goal of full employment could only be achieved if government had power to control flows of goods, capital and labor. Explain how the global transfer of disease in the pre-modern world helped in the colonization of the Americas. The Spanish soldiers invaded America in the mid-16th century. The Spanish soldiers carried on their person the germs of smallpox. America's original inhabitants had no immunity against these diseases that came from Europe. Smallpox in particular proved a deadly killer. It spread deep into America's continent and killed decimated whole communities, paving the way for conquest. The Spanish soldiers were mostly immune to smallpox, but the American had no immunity against smallpox. Due to this reason, the Spanish soldiers easily conquered America. Write a note to explain the effects of the following. Effects of the British government's decision to abolish the Corn Laws. From the late 18th century, British government restricted the import of corn. The law allowing the government to do this were commonly known as the Corn Laws. Unhappy with high food prices, industrialists and urban dwellers forced the abolition of Corn Laws. After the abolition of the Corn Laws, food could be imported from Britain more cheaply than it could be produced within the country. British agriculture was unable to compete with imports. Vast areas of land were not left uncultivated, and thousands of men and women were thrown out of work. They flocked to the cities or migrated overseas. Write a note to explain the effects of the following, and this is the effects of British government's decision to abolish corn laws. Effects of British government's, perhaps we have discussed it earlier. The effects of coming of rinderpest to Africa. Rinderpest arrived in Africa in the late 1880s. It was carried by infected cattle imported from British Asia to feed the Italian soldiers invading Eritrea in East Africa. Rinderpest or cattle plague disease came to Africa through the same animal from Asian countries. Rinderpest moved to west like forest fire, reaching Africa's Atlantic coast. Rinderpest arrived in Africa in the late 80s. It was carried by infected cattle imported from British Asia to feed the Italian soldiers invading Eritrea in East Africa. Rinderpest or cattle plague disease came to Africa through the same animal from Asian countries. Rinderpest moved to west like forest fire. Rinderpest killed 90% of the cattle of African continent. The loss of cattle destroyed African livelihoods. The planters, mine owners, and colonial governments now successfully monopolized that what is scarce cattle resources remained to strengthen their power and to force African into the labor market. Control over a scarce source of cattle enabled European colonizers to conquer and subdue Africa. Effects of the death of man working age in Europe because of the World War. In the First World War, most of the killed and maimed were men of working age. These deaths, injuries reduced to able-bodied workforce in Europe with fewer numbers within the family. Household incomes declined after the war. As men went to battle, women came forward to undertake jobs that earlier only men were expected to do. Effects of the Great Depression of the Indian economy. The Great Depression adversely affected Indian trade. India's exports and imports nearly halved between 1928 and 1934. As international prices crashed, prices in India fell. Between 1928 and 1934, wheat prices in India fell by 50%. Peasants and farmers suffered more than urban dwellers. Though agricultural prices fell sharply, the colonial government refused to reduce revenue demands. Peasants producing for the world market were the worst hit. The effects of the decision of MNCs to relocate production to Asian countries. The industrial world was hit by the unemployment that began rising from the mid-1970s. From the late 1970s, MNCs also began to shift their production operation to low-wage Asian countries. Wages were relatively low in countries like China. Thus, they became attractive destinations for investment from foreign MNCs competing to capture world markets. The relocating of industry to low-wage countries stimulated world trade and capital flows. In the last 2 decades, the world economic geography has been transformed as countries such as India, China, and Brazil have undergone rapid economic transformation. Give 2 examples from history to show the impact of technology on food availability. Impact of technology on food availability. Improvement in traffic and transport modes. Technological inventions like faster railways, lighter wagons, and Large ships helped move food more cheaply and quickly from faraway farms to final markets. Meat exports. Refrigerated ship enabled the transport of perishable foods over long distances. Now animals were slaughtered for food at the starting point in America, Australia or New Zealand and then transported to Europe as frozen meat. This reduced shipping costs and lowered meat prices in Europe. The poor in Europe could now consume a more varied diet. Now people could add meat and butter and eggs to their diet. What is meant by the Bretton Woods Agreement? The main aim of the post-war international economic system was to preserve economic stability and full employment in the industrial world. The Bretton Woods Agreement was signed between the world powers in July 1944 at the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference held in Bretton Woods in New Hampshire, USA. This is called the Bretton Woods Agreement. The Bretton Woods Conference established the International Monetary Fund (IMF) to deal with external surpluses and deficits of its members nations. The World Bank was set up to finance post-war reconstruction. The IMF and the World Bank are referred to as the Bretton Woods institutions or sometimes the Bretton Woods twins. The Bretton Woods system was earned on fixed exchange rates. In this system, national currencies, for example, the Indian rupee, were pegged to the dollar at a fixed exchange rate. The dollar itself was anchored to gold at a fixed price of 35 per ounce of gold. Imagine that you are an indentured Indian laborer in the Caribbean. Drawing from the details in this chapter, write a letter to your family describing your life and feelings. Respected Father, I have to say that here the conditions are different from what I had imagined. The agent gave me false information. Here the living and working conditions are harsh. We have to work hard daily. The task allotted to me is very heavy and I find it difficult to complete it in a day. Deductions are made from wages if the work is considered to have been done unsatisfactorily. We are unable to earn our full wages and are punished in various ways. If a laborer escapes into the wilds and on being caught, he is given severe punishment. In fact, the laborers have to spend their period of indenture in great trouble. I shall not stay here on or after my contract has ended. Your loving son. Explain the three types of movement or flows within international economic exchange. Find one example of each type of flow which involved India and Indians and write a short account of it. The three types of movements or flows. There are three types of movement or flows within international economic exchanges. The first one is flow of trade. The first is the flow of trade or trade is goods like cloth or wheat. Flow of labor. The second is the flow of labor, the migration of people in search of employment. Flow of capital. The third is the flow of capital for short term of long-term investment over long distances. Explain the three types. Yes. The flow of trade from India. All types of clothes and wheat were exported to Britain. Trade of India was also carried out. Flow of labor from India. In the 19th century, hundreds of thousands of Indian laborers went to work on plantation, in mines, and in road and railway construction projects around the world. Indentured laborers were hired under contract, which promised return travel to India after they had worked for 5 years in their employer's plantation. Flow of capital. Many Indian bankers and traders financed export agriculture in Central and Southern of Asia using either their own funds or their borrowed from European banks. They had a sophisticated system to transfer money over large distances and even developed indigenous form of corporate organization. Shikarpuri Shroffs and Nattukoti Chettiar were famous Indian bankers. Indian traders and moneylenders also invested in European and African countries. Hyderabad Sindhi traders invested colonies beyond Europe. Explain the causes of Great Depression. Causes of Great Depression. The Great Depression began around 1929 and lasted till the mid 1930s. Causes of the Great Depression were as given below. Overproduction in agriculture. Agriculture overproduction was a problem as prices slumped and agricultural income declined. Farmers tried to expand production and bring a larger volume of produce to the market to maintain their overall income. This glut worsened the market, pushing down prices even after further farm produce rotted for a lack of buyers. Reduction in US debts. In the mid 1920s, many countries financed their investments through loans from US. While it was often extremely easy to raise loans in the US when the going was good, United States overseas lenders panicked at the first sign of trouble. They started withdrawing their capital. In the first half of 1928, United States overseas loans amounted to over $1 billion. A year later, it was one quarter of that amount. Countries that depended crucially on United States loans now faced an acute crisis. Explain what is referred to as G77 countries. In what ways can G77 can be seen as a reaction to the activities of the Bretton Woods twins? The group of 77 or G77. Most of the developing countries organize themselves in as a group. The group of 77 or G77 that demand a new international economic order, NIEO. G77 is a reaction to the activities of Bretton Woods twins. In order to preserve economic stability, the full employment in the industrial world, the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conferences was held in July 1944 at Bretton Woods in New Hampshire, USA. The Bretton Woods Conference established the two institutions. The International Monetary Fund (IMF) and second, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, popularly known as the World Bank. The International Monetary Funds (IMF) was established to deal with external surpluses and deficits of its member nations. The World Bank was set up to finance post-war reconstruction. The IMF and the World Bank are referred to as the Bretton Woods institutions or sometimes the Bretton Woods twins. Explain. Most developing countries did not benefit from the fast growth which the Western countries experienced in the 1950s and 1960s. Therefore, they organized themselves as a group, the group of 77, to demand a new international economic order. By the NIEO, they meant a system that would give them real control over their natural resources, more development assistance, fairer prices for raw materials, and better access for their manufactured goods in developed countries markets. Thanks for your time. Keep watching the channel Knowledge One Diary. Happy learning and tuned always for more valuable videos to this lesson.